Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The House of Broken Things. Dalton Hall stood in the doorway of his own kitchen, watching his family eat dinner, and felt like a stranger in his own life. At the head of the oak table sat his wife Marlene, cutting precise pieces of perfectly seasoned ribeye steak for their daughter Angel. Across from them, their son Terry hunched over a paper plate containing what looked like leftover scraps from yesterday's meal: cold beans, a piece of stale bread, and some congealed gravy. The contrast wasn't subtle. It never was in the Hall household. Dalton had built this house with his own hands 15 years ago, back when he believed in the American dream of family and prosperity. The construction business had been good to him, good enough to afford the sprawling ranch house on 5 acres outside Millbrook, good enough to give his family everything they could want. But somewhere along the way, everything had gone wrong. "Terry, sit up straight." Marlene's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Just because you're eating slop doesn't mean you have to look like a pig." 8-year-old Terry straightened his shoulders but kept his eyes on his plate. Dalton noticed the boy's hands were shaking slightly, a tremor that had developed over the past year as the household dynamics had shifted. "Mommy, can I have seconds?" Angel asked, her voice sweet and musical. At 10, she had inherited Marlene's sharp features and calculating intelligence, along with something else, a casual cruelty that seemed to come as naturally as breathing. "Of course, sweetheart. There's plenty for my special girl." Dalton watched as Marlene served Angel another generous portion while Terry's plate remained nearly empty. This had become the new normal over the past 18 months, ever since Marlene's parents had moved into the guest house on their property. Cornelius and Dolores Fitzpatrick had arrived under the pretense of helping with childcare, while Dalton worked long hours on construction sites. What they'd actually brought was a toxic philosophy about bloodlines, worthiness, and the natural order of things that had poisoned his family from within. "Daddy's home," Angel chirped, finally noticing Dalton in the doorway. But her smile was perfunctory, practiced, the kind reserved for someone whose presence was tolerated rather than welcomed. "Hey, princess," Dalton said, forcing warmth into his voice. "How was school?" "Wonderful. Mrs. Patterson said my essay about family values was the best in the class. Grandpa Cornelius helped me write it." Dalton's jaw tightened. He could imagine what kind of family values Cornelius had helped her articulate. "That's great, honey. Terry, how about you? How was your day?" Terry's head snapped up, surprise flickering across his face. It had been weeks since anyone had asked him about his day. "It was okay, Dad. We learned about fractions and math, and I got all the problems right." "Fractions?" Marlene scoffed. "How perfectly appropriate. Terry's always been good with broken pieces." Angel giggled at her mother's joke, and Dalton felt something cold settle in his stomach. When had his daughter learned to laugh at cruelty? The back door opened, and Cornelius Fitzpatrick entered without knocking, a liberty he'd taken upon himself since moving onto the property. At 72, he carried himself with the bearing of old Southern aristocracy, despite the fact that his family had lost their plantation fortune 3 generations ago. What remained was pride, prejudice, and a toxic obsession with bloodline purity. "Evening, Dalton," Cornelius said, his tone suggesting he was addressing hired help rather than the man who owned the house. "I trust the honest labor went well today." The phrase honest labor was always delivered with just enough condescension to make it clear what Cornelius thought of men who worked with their hands. "It went fine," Dalton replied evenly. He learned not to rise to the bait, though every instinct screamed at him to put the old man in his place. Dolores Fitzpatrick shuffled in behind her husband, a woman who had spent so many years nursing grievances that bitterness had carved permanent lines into her face. She surveyed the dinner table with the critical eye of a general inspecting troops. "Angel, darling, you need to eat more vegetables," she said, adding another helping of asparagus to the girl's plate. "Growing girls need proper nutrition." Her eyes flicked to Terry's meager portion and stayed there for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Grandma, why does Terry always get different food?" Angel asked with the innocent curiosity of childhood. Dalton tensed, waiting to see how the adults would handle this question. This was the moment someone should explain fairness, equality, the importance of treating family members with love and respect. Instead, Marlene reached over and brushed Angel's hair back from her face. Because different people deserve different things, sweetheart. Some people are special, and some people are... She glanced at Terry with barely concealed distaste. Ordinary. But we're both your kids, Terry said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. The silence that followed was deafening. Dalton watched his wife's face harden, saw Cornelius's eyes narrow with something that might have been amusement. Are you questioning your mother? Dolores asked, her voice sharp as broken glass. Terry's eyes widened with fear. No, ma'am. You just what? Marlene demanded. You just think you deserve the same treatment as Angel? You think you're entitled to the same privileges? Dalton stepped forward. Marlene, he's 8 years old. He's old enough to understand his place, Cornelius interjected. The boy needs to learn that equality is a myth perpetuated by weak minds. Some are born to lead, others to follow. Some deserve the finest cuts of meat, others. He gestured dismissively at Terry's plate. Others get what they earn. What has an 8-year-old done to earn scraps? Dalton's voice was dangerously quiet. He was born, Dolores said simply. Sometimes that's enough. The cryptic comment hung in the air like smoke, and Dalton felt pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known existed beginning to click into place. The favoritism, the casual cruelty, the way Marlene had changed after her parents arrived, it all pointed to something deeper and more disturbing than simple preference. I think it's time Terry went to bed, Marlene announced. He looks tired. It was 7:30. Angel regularly stayed up until 9. Terry slid off his chair without protest, his small frame seeming to shrink even further. As he passed Dalton, the boy looked up with eyes that held too much sadness for someone so young. Good night, Dad. Good night, son. Dalton watched Terry disappear down the hallway, then turned back to find 4 pairs of eyes studying him with varying degrees of calculation and contempt. Is there a problem, Dalton? Marlene asked, her tone challenging. Dalton looked at his wife, really looked at her, and tried to find some trace of the woman he'd married. Marlene had always been ambitious, always wanted more than what life had given her, but she'd also been capable of warmth, laughter, love. The woman sitting at his table now was a stranger wearing his wife's face. No problem, he said finally. I need to shower. As Dalton headed for the bathroom, he could hear them resuming their conversation behind him, voices low and conspiratorial. Angel's laughter rang out again, bright and cruel, and he realized that his daughter was being molded into something monstrous right under his nose. In the bathroom, Dalton stared at himself in the mirror and tried to figure out when he'd lost control of his own family. He was 6'3", 230 pounds of muscle and bone, hardened by years of construction work and military service before that. He'd faced down armed insurgents in Afghanistan and never backed down from a fight in his life. But somehow, he'd allowed his own household to be taken over by poisonous influences who were destroying his son's spirit and corrupting his daughter's soul. The man in the mirror stared back at him with cold gray eyes that had seen too much death and dealt out enough violence to know exactly what he was capable of when pushed too far. Dalton Hall had spent the last 18 months trying to be reasonable, trying to keep the peace, trying to believe that things would get better if he just worked harder and provided more. But as he listened to his family's laughter echoing from the kitchen, laughter that excluded one member entirely, he realized that reason and peace were luxuries he could no longer afford. Some problems required more permanent solutions. Chapter 2. The Breaking Point. The sound that woke Dalton at 2:17 a.m. was unlike anything he'd ever heard. A scream of pure agony that cut through the night like a rusty blade. He was out of bed and moving before his conscious mind caught up, military training kicking in as he sprinted down the hallway toward the source of the sound. What he found in the kitchen would haunt him for the rest of his life. Terry sat on the floor, cradling his right hand against his chest, blood streaming from between his fingers. Marlene stood over him, holding a carpenter's hammer, her face twisted with rage. Angel watched from the doorway, her expression a mixture of fascination and satisfaction. What the hell happened? Dalton roared, dropping to his knees beside his son. The boy got greedy, Marlene said, her voice unnaturally calm. Decided he deserved leftovers from Angel's steak dinner. Dalton gently pulled Terry's hand away from his chest and felt his stomach lurch. The boy's ring finger was bent at an impossible angle, clearly broken, with bone visible through torn skin. You broke his finger? With a hammer? Useless boys don't deserve fingers, Marlene replied, setting the hammer on the counter with deliberate precision. Maybe now he'll remember to keep his hands to himself. Behind them, Dalton heard the sound of slow applause. Cornelius had entered the kitchen, still in his pajamas, but wide awake, as if he'd been expecting this show. Excellent lesson, daughter, he said approvingly. The boy needed to understand consequences. Dolores appeared beside him, her cold eyes studying Terry's injury with clinical detachment. Trash gets scraps, she said, spitting the words like a curse. When you reach above your station, you get reminded of your place. Dalton looked up at these people, his wife, his in-laws, even his daughter, and saw something that made his blood run cold. There was no remorse, no shock, no human compassion. They were looking at Terry like he was an animal that had been properly disciplined. Terry, we need to get you to the hospital, Dalton said, scooping his son into his arms. Is that necessary? Marlene asked. It's just a finger. Dalton stared at her with such naked fury that she actually took a step back. You broke our 8-year-old son's finger with a hammer because he was hungry, and you're asking if medical attention is necessary. Our son, Cornelius's voice carried a note of amusement. How presumptuous. The words hit Dalton like a physical blow. He looked from Cornelius to Marlene, seeing something pass between them, a look of shared knowledge that excluded him completely. What did you just say? Angel stepped forward, her young face bright with the excitement of being included in adult secrets. Grandpa Cornelius says Terry isn't really your son, Daddy. Mommy had him with someone else before you got married. That's why he doesn't look like us, and why he doesn't deserve the same things I do. The kitchen went silent, except for Terry's quiet whimpering. Dalton looked down at the boy in his arms, really looked at him, and saw what he'd been blind to for 8 years. Terry had dark hair where the rest of the family was blonde, brown eyes instead of blue, olive skin that never seemed to match either parent. Is it true? Dalton asked Marlene, his voice barely above a whisper. Marlene's chin lifted defiantly. What does it matter? You signed a birth certificate. Legally, he's your responsibility. Legally. Not actually. No, not actually. Dalton felt something fundamental break inside his chest. Not his heart, that had been damaged beyond repair months ago. This was something deeper, something that had to do with identity and belonging and the basic human need to know where you came from. Who's his father? Does it matter? Some construction worker I was seeing before we met. Probably dead by now, knowing the type. The casual cruelty in her voice, the complete dismissal of Terry's biological father, the way she spoke about it in front of the boy himself. It all crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity for Dalton. These people weren't just cruel. They were evil. Terry, Dalton said softly, we're going to the hospital now. And while we're there, we're going to have a long talk about some things. Are you going to send me away? Terry asked, his voice small and scared. Dalton looked into those brown eyes. Eyes that weren't his but belonged to a child who had called him daddy for 8 years, and felt his resolve harden into something unbreakable. No, son, I'm not going to send you away, but some other people might need to find new places to live. You can't throw us out, Dolores snarled. This is our daughter's house. Actually, Dalton said, standing with Terry still in his arms, this is my house, built with my money on land I bought with a mortgage in my name, and I'm starting to think it's time for some spring cleaning. Cornelius stepped forward, his face flushed with indignation. You forget yourself, boy. Marlene is a Fitzpatrick. We don't get thrown out by hired help. Dalton set Terry down gently and turned to face Cornelius. The old man was tall, but Dalton was taller. Cornelius had presence, but Dalton had something more dangerous, the kind of controlled violence that came from years of fighting real enemies in real wars. "Let me explain something to you, old man," Dalton said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet menace that made smart people back down. "You've been living in my house, eating my food, and poisoning my family for 18 months. You've turned my wife into a monster and my daughter into a sociopath. And now you've convinced my wife to break a child's finger with a hammer because he was hungry." Dalton took a step closer, and Cornelius involuntarily backed up. "So here's what's going to happen. I'm taking Terry to the hospital. When we get back, I want you and your charming wife off my property. Permanently." "And if we refuse?" Dolores asked, trying to sound defiant, but not quite managing it. Dalton's smile was terrifying in its complete lack of warmth. "Ma'am, I've killed people for a lot less than what you've done to that boy. You really don't want to test my patience." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Marlene stepped between them, her face pale but determined. "You can't threaten my parents, Dalton. I won't allow it." "Then maybe you should pack your bags too." Marlene's eyes widened with shock. "You can't be serious. I'm your wife. This is my home. Is it? Because from where I stand, it looks like you've chosen your side, and it's not mine." Dalton picked Terry up again and headed for the door. As he reached the threshold, he turned back to find 4 pairs of eyes watching him with varying degrees of rage and calculation. "By the way," he said conversationally, "Terry might not be my biological son, but he's more family to me than any of you have ever been. And I protect my family." The drive to the hospital gave Dalton time to think, and what he thought about was revenge. Not the hot, impulsive kind that led to mistakes and regrets, but the cold, methodical kind that his military training had taught him to plan and execute with surgical precision. As Terry dozed fitfully in the passenger's seat, his broken finger wrapped in a makeshift splint, Dalton began to formulate a plan that would make the people who had tortured his son understand exactly what real cruelty looked like. They wanted to play games with children's lives? They wanted to break bones and crush spirits? Dalton was about to teach them what those things felt like when they happened to adults. And unlike them, he wouldn't stop at one broken finger. Chapter 3: The Gathering Storm. The emergency room at Millbrook General was nearly empty at 3 in the morning, which meant Terry was seen immediately. Dr. Lisa Shannon, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and gentle hands, examined the boy's injury with the careful attention of someone who had seen too many suspicious wounds over the years. "This is a complex fracture," she told Dalton as Terry dozed under mild sedation. The finger was struck with significant force, enough to shatter the bone in multiple places. "It's going to require surgery and several weeks of healing." Dalton nodded, watching his son's peaceful face. Under the influence of pain medication, Terry looked even younger than his 8 years. "Doctor, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Dr. Shannon's expression grew wary. "What is it? Have you ever seen an injury like this from an accident? Something that could happen during normal childhood play?" The doctor was quiet for a long moment, studying Dalton's face as if trying to gauge his intentions. "Mr. Hall, in my 15 years of emergency medicine, I've seen thousands of childhood injuries. Falls, sports accidents, playground mishaps, all kinds of things. But this," she gestured toward Terry's splinted hand, "this is consistent with deliberate trauma. Someone struck this child's finger with a heavy object, probably a hammer or similar tool." "That's what I thought. Mr. Hall, I'm required by law to report suspected child abuse. I'll need to contact Child Protective Services and file a police report." Dalton felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. "I understand. Do what you need to do." As Dr. Shannon left to make her calls, Dalton sat beside Terry's bed and began making plans. His phone had been buzzing with text messages from Marlene, increasingly frantic demands to know where he was and when he was coming home. He ignored them all. Instead, he scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he was looking for. Leland Collins had been Dalton's commanding officer in Afghanistan, and after retirement, he'd started a private security firm that specialized in what he called unconventional problem solving, the kind of work that left no paper trails and asked no uncomfortable questions. The phone rang twice before Leland's familiar gravelly voice answered. "Jesus, Dalton, it's 3 in the morning. Someone better be dead." Not yet, Dalton replied. But I need a favor. What kind of favor? The kind you're good at. I need complete background checks on 4 people, and I need them fast. I'm talking deep dives, financial records, criminal history, medical records, psychological profiles, the works. That's not exactly legal. Since when has that stopped you? Leland chuckled. Fair point. What's this about? Dalton looked at Terry's sleeping form and felt his resolve harden. Someone hurt my boy. I want to know everything about them before I hurt them back. Understood. Send me the names and details. You'll have everything within 48 hours. Thanks, Lee. I owe you one. You've owed me several since Kandahar. Don't worry about it. As Dalton ended the call, Dr. Shannon returned with a police officer and a social worker in tow. Officer Robert Fuentes was young, probably early 30s, with the alert posture of someone who took his job seriously. The social worker, Grace Kane, looked like she'd seen every form of human ugliness imaginable and had developed protective calluses over her emotions. Mr. Hall, Officer Fuentes began, Dr. Shannon has informed us of the nature of your son's injury. We need to ask you some questions. For the next hour, Dalton told him everything. The favoritism, the emotional abuse, the hammer incident, the revelation about Terry's parentage. He held nothing back, painting a picture of systematic cruelty that made both professionals visibly uncomfortable. Where are the other family members now? Grace asked. At my house. When I left, they were discussing whether Terry's injury was sufficient punishment or if more was needed. Officer Fuentes made notes in his report. We'll need to interview all of them, starting with your wife and daughter. My wife is the one who broke Terry's finger. My daughter watched and laughed. My in-laws encouraged it. Grace leaned forward. Mr. Hall, based on what you're telling us, we're going to need to remove Terry from the home environment until this investigation is complete. No. The word came out with such finality that both professionals looked up in surprise. I'm sorry, Grace said. I said no. Terry isn't going into foster care. He's staying with me. Mr. Hall, we have to consider the child's safety. His safety is my responsibility. The people who hurt him will be removed from my house, not the other way around. Officer Fuentes cleared his throat. Sir, it's not that simple. We have protocols. Your protocols failed to protect him for 8 years, Dalton interrupted. My methods will be more effective. The threat in his voice was subtle but unmistakable. Grace and Officer Fuentes exchanged glances. Mr. Hall, Grace said carefully, we understand you're angry, but we need to handle this through proper channels. Of course, but while you're handling things through proper channels, I'll be handling them through more direct ones. Before either professional could respond, Dalton's phone rang. Unknown number. Yeah. Mr. Hall? This is Clark Fisher, attorney at law. I represent Cornelius and Dolores Fitzpatrick. Dalton felt a cold smile spread across his face. The old bastards had already lawyered up. That was fast. What can I do for you, counselor? My clients are concerned about the welfare of Angel Fitzpatrick Hall. They're requesting immediate custody pending a full investigation of this alleged abuse situation. Angel Fitzpatrick Hall? Is that what we're calling her now? My clients believe the child would be safer in their care, given your obvious instability and history of violence. Dalton stepped outside the hospital room, leaving the door open so Grace and Officer Fuentes could hear both sides of the conversation. History of violence? That's interesting. What violence would that be? Military records show multiple incidents of excessive force during your service overseas. Combined with your threats against my clients tonight, we believe there's sufficient cause for concern. Your clients broke an 8-year-old boy's finger with a hammer because he was hungry, and you're worried about my stability? Alleged abuse, Mr. Hall. Nothing has been proven yet, but it will be, along with a few other things I'm going to dig up about your clients. Is that a threat? Dalton's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than a shout. Mr. Fisher, let me explain something to you. Your clients have spent 18 months systematically torturing a child in my home. They've turned my wife into an abuser and my daughter into a sociopath. They've destroyed my family from the inside out. And last night, they crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. He paused, letting the silence stretch. So when you ask if that's a threat, the answer is no. It's a promise. I'm going to destroy them. Counselor. Completely, thoroughly, and permanently. And when I'm done, they're going to wish they'd never heard the name Terry Hall. Mr. Hall, I strongly advise you to. Dalton hung up and walked back into the hospital room, where Grace and Officer Fuentes were staring at him with expressions of concern and growing alarm. Gentleman, lady, he said pleasantly, I think we should accelerate our timeline. Terry's going to need protection, and the people who hurt him are already mobilizing their resources. Mr. Hall, Grace said slowly, what exactly are you planning to do? Dalton looked down at Terry, who was starting to wake up from his sedation. The boy's eyes found his immediately, full of trust and love despite everything that had happened. I'm going to be a father, Dalton said simply. The kind Terry should have had from the beginning. What he didn't say, what he couldn't say in front of law enforcement and social services, was that being Terry's father meant protecting him from the people who wanted to hurt him, by any means necessary, even if it meant becoming the monster they claimed he already was. Chapter 4. The Hunter's Preparation. Dalton's construction company occupied a sprawling compound on the outskirts of Millbrook, complete with warehouses, equipment yards, and a main office building that had served as his operational headquarters for 12 years. But the real nerve center of his business was the underground bunker he'd built beneath the main warehouse, a climate-controlled facility that officially didn't exist. 48 hours after Terry's surgery, Dalton sat in that bunker reviewing the files Leland Collins had compiled on the Fitzpatrick family. What he found was even worse than he'd expected. Cornelius Fitzpatrick had a history of fraud dating back 30 years. Real estate schemes, insurance scams, and tax evasion that had somehow never resulted in prosecution. More disturbing were the sealed juvenile records that Leland had managed to access, showing a pattern of cruelty to animals and younger children that had followed Cornelius through his teenage years. Dolores Fitzpatrick had been institutionalized twice for what medical records euphemistically called nervous breakdowns. The actual diagnoses were more specific: antisocial personality disorder with narcissistic tendencies. She'd been released both times after family members, specifically Cornelius, had convinced doctors she was stable enough for outpatient treatment. But it was Marlene's file that made Dalton's blood run cold. The woman he'd married had been married twice before, both marriages ending in suspicious circumstances. Her first husband had died in a hiking accident that insurance investigators had found questionable but not prosecutable. Her second husband had simply disappeared, leaving behind a suicide note that handwriting experts later determined was forged. Terry wasn't the only child Marlene had abandoned. She'd given birth to 3 other children by 3 different fathers, all of whom had been given up for adoption or surrendered to state custody when they became inconvenient. Angel, it seemed, was special not because she was Marlene's daughter, but because she was Cornelius's granddaughter and possibly his biological daughter as well. DNA tests referenced in sealed court documents suggested a relationship that went far beyond the normal grandfather-granddaughter bond. Dalton closed the files and sat back in his chair, trying to process the magnitude of what he'd discovered. He wasn't just dealing with garden-variety family dysfunction. He was dealing with multiple generations of psychopaths who had perfected the art of manipulation and abuse. His phone rang. Terry's voice came through the speaker, small and worried. Dad, when are you coming home? Soon, buddy. How are you feeling? My hand hurts, but the nice lady from social services is here, and she's asking lots of questions. She wants to know about the hammer thing. Dalton's grip tightened on the phone. What have you told her? The truth. That mommy hit me because I asked for food. Dad, am I in trouble? No, son. You're not in trouble. You did exactly the right thing by telling the truth. The lady says I might have to go stay somewhere else while they figure things out. I don't want to go away, Dad. You're not going anywhere, Terry. I promise. After ending the call, Dalton activated the secure communication system he'd installed in the bunker and placed a call to Santos Griffin, a man whose services were both highly illegal and completely necessary for the kind of operation Dalton was planning. Santos, it's Dalton Hall. I need to activate a priority contract. What's the scope? Full elimination package. For targets, multiple locations. Needs to look accidental. Timeline, 72 hours from start to finish. Santos was quiet for a moment. That's aggressive, even for us. It's going to cost extra. Money isn't an issue, but I need guarantees. No traces, no survivors, no loose ends. Understood. Send me the files. As Dalton uploaded the Fitzpatrick information to Santos's encrypted server, he felt a cold satisfaction settling in his chest. The law might move slowly, but justice could be much more efficient when properly motivated. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We know you're planning something. Back off, or Angel disappears forever. Dalton smiled and typed back. Bring it on, old man. You have no idea what you're dealing with. The response came immediately. Neither do you. Check your email. Dalton opened his laptop and found a message with video attachments. The first video showed Angel sitting in what appeared to be a hotel room, looking directly at the camera with cold, calculating eyes that were far too old for her 10-year-old face. Hi, Daddy, she said, her voice sweet and innocent. Grandpa Cornelius says you're being very unreasonable about Terry. He says maybe you need some motivation to be more cooperative. The second video made Dalton's blood turn to ice water. It showed Terry asleep in his hospital bed, filmed through the window from outside the building. A timestamp showed it had been recorded less than an hour ago. The third video was even more disturbing. Angel stood in Terry's hospital room, looking down at the sleeping boy with an expression of pure malice. It would be so easy, she whispered to the camera. All it would take is unplugging one little machine or pressing the wrong button on his forged rip. Poor Terry, so weak and helpless. The video ended with Angel blowing a kiss to the camera. Dalton was out of his chair and moving before the video finished playing. He speed-dialed Leland Collins while grabbing weapons from the concealed arsenal he kept in the bunker. Lee, I need an immediate extraction team at Millbrook General. My son is in danger. How immediate? Right fucking now. And Lee? Rules of engagement are weapons free. Anyone who poses a threat to the boy gets eliminated. Copy that. Team will be on site in 15 minutes. Dalton's next call was to Santos Griffin. Change of plans. The timeline just moved up to immediate. I don't care what it costs or how messy it gets. I want the Fitzpatrick family eliminated within the next 6 hours. All of them. Dalton thought about Angel's cold eyes, her whispered threats, the casual way she discussed killing Terry. All of them, he confirmed. As Dalton raced toward the hospital, he felt the last vestiges of his civilized nature burning away like paper in a fire. The Fitzpatricks had made a fundamental error in judgment. They'd assumed that threatening Terry would make Dalton more cooperative. Instead, they just signed their own death warrants. The war they'd been fighting in shadows and whispers was about to become very real, very violent, and very final. And unlike them, Dalton didn't fight with psychological games and manipulation. He fought to win. Chapter 5. The Fortress Under Siege. The private security team Leland had deployed around Millbrook General was invisible to casual observers, but immediately apparent to anyone with military training. Dalton counted 6 operatives as he approached the hospital, 2 in the parking lot, 2 at entrances, and 2 roving patrols. Professional, well-armed, and completely focused on protecting one small boy in a third-floor room. But as Dalton entered the hospital, his combat instinct screamed that something was wrong. The normal flow of late-night hospital activity was too quiet, too controlled. Staff members moved with the mechanical precision of people following a script rather than responding to organic situations. Dr. Shannon met him at the elevator, her face pale and strained. Mr. Hall, thank God you're here. We've had some unusual visitors tonight. What kind of visitors? Official ones. CDC representatives claiming there's been a potential exposure to a communicable disease. They've quarantined Terry's floor and are requiring all personnel to follow special protocols. Dalton felt ice form in his stomach. CDC? What kind of exposure? That's just it. They won't give us any specifics. Just that Terry may have been exposed to something during his time at home, and they need to run additional tests. As the elevator climbed toward the 3rd floor, Dalton processed the implications. The Fitzpatricks had somehow managed to manufacture an official government response that would give them access to Terry while keeping everyone else at a distance. The elevator doors opened to reveal a scene that confirmed his worst fears. The entire floor had been cordoned off with plastic sheeting and warning signs. Personnel in hazmat suits moved through the corridors with the slow precision of people working in a contaminated environment. "Where's my son?" "Room 314. "But Mr. Hall, you'll need to go through decontamination procedures before." Dalton was already moving, pushing through the plastic barriers with the kind of controlled violence that had kept him alive in Afghanistan. Behind him, he could hear Dr. Shannon calling for security, but he knew his own people would handle any interference. Room 314 was at the end of the corridor, isolated from the other patient rooms by additional barriers and warning signs. Through the observation window, Dalton could see Terry lying in bed, unconscious, with multiple forelines running into his small body. A figure in a hazmat suit stood beside the bed, adjusting one of the 4 drips. Dalton kicked in the door. The person in the hazmat suit spun around, and even through the protective mask, Dalton could see Angel's bright blue eyes staring back at him with cold amusement. "Hello, Daddy. You're just in time to say goodbye. Get away from him. Or what? You'll hurt a 10-year-old girl? In front of all these witnesses." Angel gestured toward the observation window, where several medical personnel had gathered to watch the confrontation. Dalton stepped closer, and Angel's hand moved to the 4 control panel. "Did you know that potassium chloride is completely undetectable in postmortem blood work if you don't know to look for it?" Poor Terry, already so weak from his injuries. His little heart just couldn't handle the stress. "Angel, don't do this." "Why not? You never loved me the way you love him. Even before you knew he wasn't your real son, you always chose him over me. Well, now you get to watch him die and know that it's all your fault." Angel's finger hovered over the 4 pump controls. One push would send a lethal dose of potassium directly into Terry's bloodstream. "You're right," Dalton said quietly. "I never loved you the way I love him." Angel's eyes flashed with triumph. Finally, some honesty. "Because Terry is good and innocent and pure. And you," Dalton's voice dropped to a whisper, "you're a monster, just like your real father." Angel's hand stilled on the controls. "What did you say?" "Cornelius, your biological father. I found the DNA tests, Angel. I know what he did to your mother when she was 14. I know what he's been doing to you." For the first time since he'd known her, Angel's mask of cold control slipped. Confusion and pain flickered across her features. "You're lying." "I'm not. And deep down, you know I'm not. You know why you're different from other children. You know why you feel things differently, why hurting people doesn't bother you the way it should." Angel's hand began to shake. "Shut up. He made you into this, Angel. Cornelius and Dolores and your mother. They broke you before you were old enough to understand what was happening. You're not evil because you were born that way. You're evil because they made you that way." Tears began streaming down Angel's face behind the hazmat mask. I can't. Yes, you can. You can choose to be different. You can choose to protect Terry instead of hurting him." Angel looked down at the 4 controls, then at Terry's peaceful face, then back at Dalton. "But if I don't do this, Grandpa will be angry. He said he'd make me go away forever if I don't prove I'm worthy." "Fuck Grandpa. Fuck all of them. You're 10 years old, Angel. You shouldn't have to prove anything to anyone." Angel's finger moved away from the controls. She looked at Dalton with eyes that suddenly seemed very young and very lost. "Daddy, I'm scared." "I know, baby. I'm scared too." The observation window exploded inward as Leland Collins and his team breached the room from the outside. Within seconds, the space was filled with tactical operators in full combat gear. "Target neutralized," Leland reported. "Area is secure." But Dalton was already moving, scooping Angel into his arms despite the hazmat suit she wore. She felt impossibly small and fragile, nothing like the calculating monster who had threatened Terry's life moments before. "Sir," one of the operatives reported, "we've got multiple bogies approaching from stairwells. Looks like the CDC response was cover for a larger operation." Through the broken window, Dalton could see vehicles approaching the hospital from multiple directions. The Fitzpatricks had marshaled significant resources for what was meant to be the final elimination of both children. Lee, I need extraction for all three of us. Now, copy that. Roof access in 60 seconds. As alarms began blaring throughout the hospital, Dalton carefully disconnected Terry from the legitimate medical equipment while leaving the 4 lines that Angel had been using to deliver poison. His son was unconscious but breathing normally. Whatever they'd given him was meant to keep him docile, not kill him outright. Angel, Dalton said, lifting Terry in his arms, we're going to run now. And when we get somewhere safe, you're going to tell me everything about what they've done to you. All of it. Angel nodded, tears still streaming down her face. Will you still love me? Even though I'm bad. Dalton looked into those blue eyes, Cornelius's eyes, and saw not a monster, but a damaged child who had been systematically tortured into becoming something unnatural. You're not bad, Angel. You're broken, and broken things can be fixed. As they ran toward the stairwell that would take them to the roof and safety, Dalton realized that his war with the Fitzpatricks had evolved beyond simple revenge. Now it was about salvation. And unlike the games they'd been playing with psychological manipulation and elaborate schemes, salvation required the complete and utter destruction of everyone who had contributed to Angel's corruption. The Fitzpatricks wanted to play God with children's lives? Dalton was about to show them what real divine justice looked like. Chapter 6. Revelations in Blood. The safe house was a converted hunting lodge 50 miles outside Millbrook, buried deep enough in the pine forest that satellites couldn't get clear imagery and cell phone signals died at the property line. Dalton had purchased it years ago through a shell company, ostensibly as a weekend retreat, but actually as a bolt hole for situations exactly like this one. Terry slept in the master bedroom, monitored by medical equipment that Leland's team had appropriated from the hospital during their extraction. Whatever the Fitzpatricks had given him was wearing off, but slowly. Angel sat curled in a chair beside his bed, still wearing hospital scrubs and watching her brother's face with an expression of guilt and confusion. In the main room, Dalton reviewed the intelligence his team had gathered during the hospital raid. The fake CDC response had been coordinated by Cornelius using contact from his decades of financial fraud, people who specialized in creating official-looking documentation for a price. The plan had been elegant in its simplicity. Isolate Terry, eliminate him using untraceable methods, then claim Angel had been traumatized by witnessing his death from the mysterious exposure. But what disturbed Dalton more than the murder plot was what they'd found in the fake medical equipment. Along with the potassium chloride Angel had been instructed to use, there were syringes filled with what laboratory analysis revealed to be concentrated LSD and methamphetamine. The plan wasn't just to kill Terry. It was to drive Angel insane in the process, creating a witness who would be too psychologically damaged to ever testify coherently about what had happened. Sick bastards, Leland muttered, reading over Dalton's shoulder. Using kids as weapons is bad enough, but this... They've been doing it for years, Dalton replied, showing him Angel's medical records. Look at this. 3 different psychiatric hospitalizations before she turned 8, all for violent outbursts, all followed by periods where she was kept sedated with experimental drugs. They were conditioning her, training her, breaking down her natural empathy, and rebuilding her as a weapon they could point at anyone who threatened them. Dalton's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Santos Griffin. Package delivered. Fitzpatrick compound neutralized. 2 primary targets eliminated. 1 secondary target secured for interrogation. Which one did you keep alive? Dalton typed back. The old woman. Client specified maximum information extraction before disposal. Dalton felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. Dolores Fitzpatrick had always been the cruelest of the 3 adults, the one who seemed to take the most pleasure in Terry's suffering. If anyone deserved an extended conversation about consequences, it was her. Angel, he called softly. Can you come here for a minute? Angel looked up from Terry's bedside, her young face still streaked with dried tears. Is he going to be okay? He's going to be fine. But I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Angel approached slowly, her movements carrying the hyper-vigilant caution of someone who had learned that adults could turn violent without warning. Am I in trouble? No, sweetheart. You're safe now. But I need to understand what they did to you, so I can make sure it never happens again. For the next hour, Angel told Dalton things that made him understand why some people believed in hell. The systematic abuse had started when she was 3 years old, psychological conditioning designed to make her view cruelty as normal and kindness as weakness. Cornelius had used a combination of rewards and punishments to shape her behavior, praising her when she hurt others and withdrawing affection when she showed compassion. The sexual abuse had started when she was 5. The drug experiments had begun at 6. By the time she was 8, Angel had been transformed into something that wasn't quite human anymore. A perfectly programmed sociopath who could mimic emotions but not feel them, who understood manipulation but not love, who knew how to inflict pain but not how to experience genuine pleasure. They said I was special, Angel whispered, her voice hollow. They said normal people were weak, and I was strong because I could do things they couldn't do. What kinds of things? Hurt people without feeling bad about it. Lie without getting nervous. Watch someone cry and not want to help them. Dalton felt something break inside his chest. Angel, you know that's not normal, right? You know that feeling bad when you hurt someone is actually a good thing. Angel nodded slowly. I think I used to know that before, but it's been so long since I felt anything real that I forgot what it was like. Do you want to remember? Can I? Or am I broken forever? Dalton looked into those blue eyes, Cornelius's eyes, and saw something that gave him hope. Behind the calculated coldness, behind the programmed responses, there was still a spark of something genuine, something that could be nurtured back to life with enough time and care. Nobody's broken forever, Angel, but it's going to take work and it's going to hurt sometimes. Are you willing to try? Angel nodded, and for the first time since he'd known her, her expression looked authentically hopeful. What about Grandpa and Grandma and Mommy? When they find out I didn't kill Terry, they're going to be very angry. Dalton's smile was gentle, but his eyes were absolutely merciless. Angel, you don't need to worry about them anymore. They're never going to hurt you or Terry or anyone else ever again. What happened to them? Justice. Before Angel could ask for clarification, Dalton's secure phone rang. Santos Griffin's voice came through the encrypted connection, professional and emotionless. Target Dolores is ready for client interview. Location secure, privacy guaranteed. Dalton looked at Angel, who was watching him with the sharp intelligence that had made her such an effective weapon. Angel, I need to go take care of some business. Leland is going to stay here with you and Terry. If you need anything at all, you tell him, okay? Are you going to hurt Grandma Dolores? The question was asked with clinical curiosity rather than emotional concern, and Dalton realized that Angel's recovery was going to be a long and complicated process. I'm going to have a conversation with her about the things she's done, and then I'm going to make sure she can never do them again. Angel nodded as if this was perfectly reasonable. Can I come with you? No, sweetheart. That's not something you need to see. But I want to watch. I want to see what happens to people who hurt children. The request was delivered in a tone of innocent curiosity that made Dalton's skin crawl. Even knowing what had been done to her, even understanding that she was a victim rather than a perpetrator, Angel's casual approach to violence was deeply disturbing. Angel, one of the things we're going to work on is understanding the difference between justice and revenge. Justice is about protecting people and making sure bad things don't happen again. Revenge is about making people suffer because it feels good. What are you going to do to Grandma? Justice, Dalton said firmly. And you're going to stay here and take care of Terry, because that's what good sisters do. As Dalton prepared to leave, Angel's voice stopped him at the door. Daddy, yeah. Thank you for not giving up on me. Dalton looked back at the damaged child who had nearly murdered her brother just hours before, and felt his resolve crystallize into something unbreakable. I will never give up on you, Angel. No matter what you've done, no matter what you might do, you're my daughter, and I love you. Angel smiled, the first genuine expression of joy he'd ever seen on her face. I love you too, Daddy. For real this time. As Dalton drove toward his final confrontation with Dolores Fitzpatrick, he reflected on the strange mathematics of justice. 3 adults had systematically tortured and corrupted 2 children over the course of years. 2 of those adults were already dead. The third was about to learn what it felt like to be completely helpless and at the mercy of someone stronger. It wasn't revenge. It was balance. And unlike the games the Fitzpatricks had played with psychological manipulation and elaborate schemes, balance required absolute finality. Chapter 7. The Last Confession. The abandoned grain silo stood like a concrete monument to decay on the outskirts of the county, its bulk casting long shadows across fields that had been fallow for 20 years. Santos Griffin had chosen the location for its acoustic properties. Sound didn't carry, and the thick walls muffled even the loudest screams. Dalton found Dolores Fitzpatrick exactly where Santos had left her, suspended by her wrist from a chain that disappeared into the shadows above. At 70 years old, she looked fragile and pathetic hanging there in her blood-stained nightgown, but Dalton felt no pity. This woman had orchestrated the systematic torture of children for decades. "Hello, Dolores." Her head snapped up, eyes focusing on him with a mixture of fear and defiance. Despite her situation, she still carried herself with the arrogant bearing of someone who believed she was inherently superior to the people around her. "You can't do this," she gasped, her voice hoarse from screaming. "I'm an old woman. I have rights. So did Terry. So did Angel. So did all the other children you've destroyed over the years." Dalton circled her slowly, cataloging the damage Santos had already inflicted. Professional work. Painful enough to ensure cooperation, but not so severe as to cause unconsciousness or shock. "I found the records, Dolores. All of them. Hospital admissions, juvenile court documents, Child Protective Services reports going back 40 years. You and Cornelius have been in the business of breaking children for longer than I've been alive. Those children were problems. Defective. We were trying to fix them. Fix them? You turned your own daughter into a serial killer. You conditioned your granddaughter to be a sociopathic weapon. You convinced my wife to torture an 8-year-old boy because he was hungry." Dolores's laugh was bitter, unrepentant. Marlene was always weak. She needed guidance to reach her full potential. Her full potential was breaking a child's finger with a hammer. Her full potential was understanding that some people matter and others don't. That bloodlines determine worth. That strength means being willing to eliminate weakness wherever you find it. Dalton felt something cold and final settle in his chest. Even now, even hanging helpless and broken, Dolores showed no remorse, no recognition that what she'd done was evil. She was a true believer in her own twisted philosophy. Where are the other children? What other children? Dalton picked up a pair of bolt cutters from the table Santos had prepared. "Dolores, I've read the records. Marlene gave birth to 4 children before Angel. 3 of them disappeared from official records after being placed in your care. I want to know where they are." "Dead," she said simply. "They were defective, weak. They served their purpose and were disposed of." "What purpose?" "Practice. Angel needed subjects to work with as her training progressed. The others were expendable." Dalton had thought himself prepared for the depths of the Fitzpatrick family's evil. But this casual admission of child murder made him understand that he was dealing with something beyond simple cruelty. This was organized, systematic genocide against anyone the family deemed unworthy of life. "How many children have you killed?" "Killed? We improved them. We gave their meaningless lives purpose by using them to create something better." The bolt cutters closed around Dolores's ring finger with a wet crunch. Her scream echoed off the concrete walls like the cry of a damned soul. "How many?" 17, she gasped between sobs. 17 over 30 years. Foster children, mostly. Runaways. Children no one would miss. And Angel participated. Angel was our masterpiece. By the time she was 7, she could inflict more psychological damage than most adults. She had a gift for finding exactly what someone feared most and using it against them. Dalton moved the bolt cutters to her middle finger. What was the plan for Terry? The plan was to break him completely, then use him as Angel's final test. If she could kill someone she'd lived with for years without feeling remorse, she would have been ready for larger operations. Larger operations? Missing persons cases, unsolved murders, people who disappear without a trace because someone with Angel's skills decided they were unnecessary. The middle finger joined the ring finger on the concrete floor. Dolores's voice had become a continuous whimper punctuated by gasps of pain. What about the plan for me? You were an obstacle. Marlene never loved you, you know. She married you for your money and your property, but she always intended to eliminate you once your usefulness ended. Ow! Hunting accident. You were going to be found dead on your own property, killed by a stray bullet during deer season. Very tragic. Very accidental. And then what? And then Marlene would inherit everything, take Angel, and disappear. We had new identities prepared, new lives arranged. Angel would have grown up to be perfect, beautiful, intelligent, completely without conscience. Dalton set down the bolt cutters and picked up a medical scalpel from Santos's collection of tools. Dolores, I want you to understand something. You're going to die here tonight. That's not a threat or a negotiation. It's a simple fact. The only question is how much you suffer before it happens. You can't murder an old woman in cold blood. You're not like us. You're right. I'm not like you. Dalton's voice was quiet, conversational. You torture children because you enjoy it. I'm going to torture you because you deserve it. The scalpel found the soft skin at the base of her throat, drawing a thin line of blood without severing anything vital. Tell me about Angel's training. For the next hour, Dolores told Dalton things that would have broken a weaker man's sanity. The systematic psychological conditioning, the sexual abuse masked as lessons about power dynamics, the drug experiments designed to enhance Angel's natural sociopathic tendencies. By the time she was 8 years old, Angel had been transformed into something that wasn't quite human, a perfect predator with the appearance of an innocent child. The beautiful part, Dolores whispered, her voice growing weak from blood loss, was that she enjoyed it. By the end, Angel looked forward to her lessons. She begged us to let her practice on new subjects. Because you programmed her to enjoy it. Because we unlocked her true nature. Deep down, everyone is a predator. We just had the courage to embrace that truth. Dalton stepped back and studied Dolores's ruined form. She was dying slowly, blood pooling beneath her suspended body, but her eyes still held that cold certainty that she was right and the rest of the world was weak. Any last words? Angel will never be normal. You can try to fix her, but the programming goes too deep. Sooner or later, she'll revert to what we made her. And when she does, she'll kill you first. Dalton considered this, then nodded slowly. Maybe, but at least she'll have the choice. That's more than you ever gave her. The final cut was quick and merciful. More mercy than Dolores Fitzpatrick had ever shown a child in her 70 years of life. As Dalton walked away from the grain silo, leaving behind the corpse of the last Fitzpatrick family member, he felt a strange sense of completion. The immediate threat to his children was over. The people who had tormented Terry and corrupted Angel would never hurt anyone again. But as he drove through the darkness toward home, Dolores's final words echoed in his mind. Angel's recovery would be a long and uncertain process. The damage done to her psyche ran deeper than any physical wound, and there was no guarantee that love and patience would be enough to heal it. Still, he had to try, because unlike the Fitzpatricks, Dalton believed that people could choose to be better than their worst impulses, even if that choice had to be made every day for the rest of their lives. Even if the alternative was becoming the very monsters they'd fought so hard to defeat. Chapter 8. The Reckoning's Price. 6 months after the grain silo, Dalton stood in the kitchen of his rebuilt home, watching his children eat breakfast together for the first time in their lives. Terry's right hand was still weak from the surgery to repair his finger, but he could grip a fork well enough to eat scrambled eggs. Angel sat across from him, carefully cutting her pancakes into precise squares and studying her brother's face with the intense focus of someone learning to read human emotions for the first time. "Terry," Angel said suddenly, her voice carrying the careful cadence of someone practicing conversation, "I want to say I'm sorry again. For what I almost did at the hospital. Terry looked up from his eggs, his brown eyes serious but not afraid. The boy had a remarkable capacity for forgiveness that Dalton both admired and worried about. I know you're sorry, Angel, and I forgive you. But Terry hesitated, searching for words. Why did you want to hurt me? Angel set down her fork and considered the question with the same methodical approach she once brought to planning cruelties. Because they taught me that hurting people meant I was strong, and being strong meant I was good. But I think they were wrong about that. How do you know they were wrong? Because when I was going to hurt you, I felt empty inside, like I was just a machine doing what I was programmed to do. But when Daddy said he still loved me even though I was broken, I felt something different, something that made me want to be better instead of just being strong. Dalton felt his chest tighten with pride and sorrow. Angel's recovery was progressing, but it was a fragile thing built on conscious choice rather than natural instinct. Every day, she had to decide to be human instead of the weapon the Fitzpatricks had created. Dad, Terry said, Dr. Shannon wants to know if we're ready to go back to school next week. Are you ready? Terry shrugged with the resilience of childhood. I guess. But Angel says she's scared. Dalton looked at Angel, who was staring down at her plate with the expression of someone wrestling with thoughts too complex for her age. What are you scared of, sweetheart? I'm scared that when other kids are mean to me, I'll remember how to be mean back. Really mean, and I won't be able to stop myself. It was a legitimate fear. Angel's psychological conditioning had been thorough, and stress could trigger relapses into her programmed responses. But isolation wasn't the answer. She needed to learn how to function in normal social situations. We'll take it slow, Dalton said. Start with half days, build up gradually. And if you feel those old thoughts coming back, you can find me immediately. Angel nodded, but Dalton could see the doubt in her eyes. She wanted to be normal, but she didn't trust herself to stay that way. Dalton's phone rang, displaying Detective Emmett Church's number. Church had been the lead investigator on the Fitzpatrick case, and while he'd never found enough evidence to pursue charges related to their deaths, he'd been helpful in sorting out the legal aftermath. Morning, Detective. Dalton, we need to talk. Can you come down to the station? What's this about? New information about your case, and some questions that need answering. An hour later, Dalton sat across from Detective Church in an interview room that smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Church was a good cop, thorough, fair, and smart enough to know when he was dealing with something bigger than a small-town department could handle. The FBI crime lab finished analyzing the Fitzpatrick property. Church began setting a thick file on the table between them. What they found: Jesus, Dalton, I've been a cop for 25 years, and I've never seen anything like it. What kind of thing? Bodies. 17 of them, buried in various locations around the compound. Children, mostly, ranging in age from 6 to 14, all showing signs of systematic torture and abuse. Dalton felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. Dolores had been telling the truth about the scope of their crimes. Any identification on the victims? That's the thing. Most of them were never officially reported missing. Foster kids who aged out of the system, runaways from broken homes, children whose disappearances were written off as voluntary departures. Church opened the file and spread out crime scene photographs that made Dalton's stomach clench despite everything he'd seen and done. The FBI profiler thinks we're looking at 3 generations of organized killers. A family business built around child trafficking, torture, and murder. The scale of it is unprecedented. What do you need from me? Church leaned back in his chair and studied Dalton's face with the calculating gaze of someone trying to read a suspect. I need to understand how you knew to look for this. Your initial report mentioned systematic abuse, but you seem to know there were deeper crimes involved. How? Dalton had prepared for this question. Military intelligence training. I learned to recognize patterns of organized criminal behavior. And your response was to immediately secure your children and disappear into the woods. My response was to protect my family by any means necessary. Church nodded slowly. Understandable. But here's what bothers me, Dalton. 3 people died in what appears to be a professional hit. Cornelius and Marlene were found shot execution style, and Dolores disappeared completely. Someone with serious skills and serious resources wanted the Fitzpatrick family eliminated. Maybe someone else figured out what they were doing. Maybe. Or maybe someone decided to handle the problem through extrajudicial means. The accusation hung in the air between them like smoke. Church knew, or at least suspected, that Dalton had been involved in the Fitzpatrick's deaths. But knowing and proving were two different things. Detective, are you questioning me as a witness or as a suspect? I'm questioning you as a father who had every reason to want these people dead, and who has the skills to make that happen without leaving evidence. Dalton met Church's gaze steadily. Those people tortured my son and turned my daughter into a weapon. If I'd killed them, I wouldn't lose a minute of sleep over it. But you're saying you didn't? I'm saying that justice took care of the problem. How it happened is less important than the fact that it did happen. Church closed the file and sat back. The FBI wants to interview Angel about her experiences with the family. They think she might have information about other victims or accomplices. Absolutely not. Dalton, she's the only living witness to. She's a 10-year-old girl who's trying to recover from systematic psychological torture. I won't have federal agents traumatizing her all over again for the sake of an investigation. What if there are other children out there? Other victims who could be saved? Dalton considered this. It was possible that the Fitzpatricks had accomplices, other family members or associates who were continuing their work. But Angel's mental health had to be the priority. I'll talk to her. If she remembers anything that could help other children, I'll contact you immediately. But no official interviews, no depositions, no courtroom testimony. Church nodded reluctantly. Fair enough. But Dalton, if you know something about how the Fitzpatricks died, now will be the time to share it. The FBI isn't going to be as understanding as I am. I appreciate the warning, detective, but some stories are better left untold. As Dalton drove home, he thought about the delicate balance he was trying to maintain. His children were safe, the immediate threat was over, and the truth about the Fitzpatrick's crimes was finally coming to light. But Angel's recovery was fragile, and any disruption could trigger a relapse into her programmed responses. The federal investigation would continue, and eventually, more questions would be asked. But by then, Dalton hoped, Angel would be strong enough to handle the truth about what her family had done, and what he had done to stop them. Until then, he would do what he'd always done, protect his children by any means necessary, even if it meant keeping secrets that could destroy them all. Chapter 9. The New Foundation. 1 year later, Dalton stood in the doorway of Angel's bedroom, watching her sleep peacefully for the first time since he'd known her. Gone were the night terrors, the violent outbursts, the calculating coldness that had made her seem far older than her years. In sleep, she looked like what she was, an 11-year-old girl who was finally learning how to be a child. The transformation hadn't been easy or quick. Months of intensive therapy, careful medication to rebalance brain chemistry damaged by years of abuse, and constant vigilance to prevent relapses into programmed behaviors. But slowly, incrementally, Angel was becoming human again. She'd made her first real friend at school 3 months ago, a shy girl named Rosa who shared Angel's love of reading and seemed immune to the social dynamics that confused and frustrated Angel. Watching them together, Dalton could see Angel practicing empathy like someone learning a foreign language, carefully observing Rosa's emotional responses and trying to mirror them. It was artificial at first, but gradually becoming more natural. Terry had adapted with the remarkable resilience of childhood, though he still flinched sometimes when adults raised their voices unexpectedly. The physical therapy for his hand was progressing well, and Dr. Shannon predicted he'd have full function within another year. More importantly, the psychological damage seemed to be healing. Terry was laughing again, playing with other children, showing interest in normal 8-year-old activities. But it was the relationship between the siblings that gave Dalton the most hope. Angel had appointed herself Terry's protector with the same methodical dedication she'd once brought to planning cruelties. When bullies targeted Terry for his damaged hand, Angel intervened with calculated precision. Not violence, but psychological manipulation that left the aggressors uncertain and unsettled. She was using her weapons for protection instead of destruction. "Dad, Terry's voice came from behind him. The boy stood in the hallway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, buddy. Just checking on your sister. She was crying earlier, during dinner. Crying? Happy crying, I think. When you told her about the college fund you set up. She went to her room after, and I heard her crying, but when I asked if she was okay, she said she was just feeling grateful. Dalton felt his chest tighten with emotion. Angel's tears had been one of the last things to return as her emotional range expanded. For months, she'd been unable to cry even when she wanted to, her natural responses suppressed by years of conditioning. The fact that she could now experience and express gratitude was a milestone worth celebrating. Terry, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Okay, are you happy here? With Angel and me? Do you feel safe? Terry considered the question with the seriousness he brought to all important matters. I feel safer than I ever have. And Angel, she's different now. Better. She takes care of me instead of trying to hurt me. Do you forgive her? For what she almost did at the hospital. I forgave her a long time ago, Dad. She was sick then, and now she's getting better. People shouldn't be punished forever for things they did when they were sick. The wisdom in those words, coming from a 9-year-old boy who had every reason to hold grudges, reminded Dalton why Terry was worth protecting at any cost. What about me, Terry? Do you forgive me for not protecting you better from the beginning? Terry's expression grew puzzled. Forgive you for what? You saved us. You got rid of the bad people and kept Angel and me safe. But I should have seen what was happening sooner. I should have stopped it before it got so bad. Terry stepped forward and hugged Dalton with the fierce devotion that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. Dad, you did everything right. You just had to figure out who the real bad guys were first. As they stood together in the hallway, Angel's door opened and she emerged, hair mussed from sleep and eyes bright with the intelligence that had once been used as a weapon. Are we having a family meeting without me? She asked, her tone carrying the light sarcasm she'd been experimenting with as her personality developed. Just checking on everyone before bed, Dalton said. Angel studied his face with the perceptiveness that remained her most pronounced characteristic. You're worried about something. What is it? Dalton had learned not to lie to Angel. Her ability to detect deception was too refined, and honesty was crucial to maintaining the trust that formed the foundation of her recovery. Detective Church called earlier. The FBI investigation into your grandparents' crimes is expanding. They might want to interview you at some point. Angel's face went through a series of micro-expressions as she processed this information. Fear, anger, calculation, and finally something that looked like resolution. Will you be there with me? Every second. Will they try to make me go back to being the way I was before? No, sweetheart. They just want to understand what happened so they can help other children who might be in similar situations. Angel nodded slowly. I think I'd like to help other children. If I can. Are you sure? It might be difficult to talk about those things. I'm sure, because now I know the difference between hurting people and helping them. And I want to choose helping. Terry reached for Angel's hand, and she took it without hesitation. Another milestone in her journey back to humanity. We'll do it together, Terry said. Like a family. Like a real family, Angel corrected. The kind that protects each other instead of hurting each other. As Dalton tucked his children back into their beds, he reflected on the strange mathematics of justice and redemption. 3 evil people had died to save 2 innocent ones. A lifetime of programming had been slowly, carefully undone through love and patience. A damaged child was learning to choose humanity over the monstrous nature she'd been given. It wasn't a perfect solution. Angel would always carry scars from her early conditioning, and there would be moments when her old responses surfaced. Terry would always remember the cruelty he'd experienced, even if he chose to forgive it. And Dalton would always know that he'd crossed lines that could never be uncrossed. But they were alive, they were safe, and they were learning to be a real family. That was more than he'd dared hope for during those dark months when the Fitzpatricks had seemed untouchable. As Dalton settled into his own bed, his phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The children of monsters don't have to become monsters themselves. Thank you for proving that. SG. Santos Griffin, checking in from whatever shadows he now occupied. The message was deleted immediately, but its meaning lingered. Dalton had saved 2 children from becoming the weapons their abusers intended. In doing so, he'd probably saved countless others from becoming their future victims. The ripple effects of stopping generational evil were impossible to calculate, but they were undoubtedly significant. Outside, a winter storm was beginning to develop, but inside the rebuilt Hall house, 3 people slept peacefully under one roof. A father who had chosen to become a protector instead of a predator, and 2 children who were learning that love was stronger than the darkness that had tried to claim them. It wasn't the ending Dalton had expected when he'd first discovered his family's betrayal. It was better, because unlike revenge, redemption created something new instead of just destroying what was broken. And sometimes, in a world full of monsters, that was the only victory that mattered. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.